Good morning from the Chris Rod Max Show, where every week we talk about the latest development in AI and we're going to comment on it. We provide our thoughts and we talk about the first, second, and third order consequences for all of us. Really happy to be back. Hi, Rod. Hi, Max. How are you guys?
Hi, everyone. Great. How are you?
Good to be back.
Amazing. Today, I thought instead of talking about, the risks and sort of like the limitations and things that we spoke about in previous episodes, I wanted to talk a little bit about the latest innovation and the cool stuff in the AI realm and beyond that has been happening over the last week. And so we're going to, of course, talk about the latest model of OpenAI, the O1 release. And also all users have access to a preview as well as a mini version of it. We're going to talk a little bit about the advancements in robotics when it comes to AI, which I think is a field we haven't spoken about. And it's obviously related to AI because basically you have the hardware and now combined with the software that's more capable of reasoning brings up very interesting new use cases. And last but not least, of course, I want to talk a bit about other things that have been in the news. We talk a little bit about Klarna and also on the latest private spacewalk by SpaceX. So without further ado, let's start and let's talk a little bit about the latest release of OpenAI, internally called Strawberry, and it's been a bit in the news, but now officially it has been launched as O1. And perhaps let's start a little bit to understand how is it different, and maybe Rod, please provide a little bit about the technical perspective.
Yes, totally. As you were saying, so it has been on the news already for a while. I would say that when it was being discussed, when it was still a bit of a rumor, it was seen as, let's say, the next big release, something that will be the successor of, let's say, like a GPT-4, let's say like a GPT-5. But in the end, that was not the case. So what we have now is interesting in the sense that this is now a model that is quite good for what we can call logical tasks. So for example, if you say these classical problems that we had back, let's like in high school of, you have a set of options and you have to find like the best path for it and so on. And then one needs to think through and then decide what it is. This type of questions for previous models were very hard, or just the question of, in this sentence, how many words are inside? A GPT-3, a GPT-3.5, and GPT-4 will have not provided the right number. But now with what is called, so this new model O1, there's a cost to that, in that historically the models were getting faster. So in the answers, they were getting very, very fast in how they generate it. With this new model, you get the answer, but it takes time, because what it's doing is what OpenAI calls reasoning. It's not reasoning. What is happening is in the background, it's exploring multiple options. Think like a decision tree. It's trying to explore different things and then come up with what is the best outcome for that. So there's the caveat or downside that is slower compared to others. And also that it has a specialization on just this subset of tasks. So other things such as, for example, being good for code generation or calling tools and so on, this is something where other models are better. So what is interesting here is that now we have the choice and we have to decide which one to take depending on the task. Maybe for this one, some tasks can be better. For other ones, other tasks can be better.
I feel like we already live in a world where we have so many choices which models to use. I think, Rod, you're very keen on Claude. I think, Max, you use a Copilot at work. I actually normally just use ChatGPT. So now it's becoming even more complex because now we have also different models to choose from. And recently I've heard also that this new version O2 has passed an IQ test and has now like an IQ of 120, which is actually by comparison much better or more intelligent than maybe the average. The average IQ is around 100. So by that definition, O1 is supposed to reason better than maybe the average human being. And also, Rod, what I'm understanding from what you're saying is like maybe trivial tasks that humans are capable of doing, like counting words in a sentence, are actually in fact very complex tasks. And now this is getting simplified, and or not simplified, but there's a model now that's also capable of doing this. And Max, maybe also share your thoughts on this new development. And also, I'm really interested, like, what does it mean now in terms of use cases? What can we do with it? How have you ever tried it? And what do you think about it?
Thank you very much. I think so. Let's start with, I guess, the initial development, right? So what, I guess, OpenAI call it reasoning, and then it's really around chain of thought, which I find really interesting. And I think of it like a normal human being. So, for example, if I were to argue a point, I don't know about what other people do. I would normally just draw out, what exactly I'm trying to say. How does one, I guess, a point lead to the next point and lead to the next point. And then you try to then look at your entire argument to try to understand what exactly is that. So to me, that feels like chain of thought. It's almost like a sequential step by step to think about whatever questions you're being asked. It's not just looking forward and predicting, which is a lot of ML solution, but also looking backward and try to think about it. I think that's very interesting because I guess as humans, we tend to do that, like, kind of just innately try to understand all the different reasoning behind it. And hence, if we were to take that and try to apply it to what are we doing as humans today, there will be quite a lot of tasks that can be done in this way. So it's almost like, I always think about like querying something. So let's say if someone were to ask a customer service about certain questions, you will be able to, kind of just based on that conversation, understand a little bit what they're trying to get to. But because of the reasoning part and also other data availability, you kind of just be able to capture the entire context a little bit better. And hence, it's less likely to give you answers that are a little bit out of context. And to me, that's very interesting because it then applies to a lot of different things. You as a user kind of use less of your brain and let let OpenAI to take over the thinking for you. So the use cases in my head would be anything that requires a wider context than just that small little question. It'll be things like customer service, like how much balances have I left? Based on my past, I don't know, I'm thinking about finance, right? Based on my past expenditure, what kind of loans can you think I'll get? And then it's just having that dialogue and conversations based on a certain type of data. So that's at least how I think about it. And obviously, if you think about like coding, that also helps, right? Help you to find like root causes. That also quite interesting. Like you kind of debate, why do I want to write this code this way? You have an ability to think about, how did we arrive at this answer? So that's how I think about it.
I want to add there, Chris, about so this topic of navigating this model jungle that is happening in that. So if you think about from the enterprise side, how these applications were made historically, let's say like the classic one, chat with your data. What was happening was that we were trying to cramming as much as possible, so much historic data as we could in the prompt. And then we will expect that the model will do the work of understanding what is relevant, what is not, and so on, and provide the answer. So for a PDF, for a spreadsheet, whatever it is. But now with this model, the opposite is best practice. If you provide too much context, given that this model has to navigate options, it gets lost and will not provide a good answer. So instead here, you have to first already provide, let's say, like, what are like the most relevant answers or the most relevant information, and then you can get good results. So this will also bring a lot of challenges and new questions for anyone doing applications in enterprise on what are best practices, given that we have this new breed of models.
Rod, and to piggyback on that, I think I've tested both versions, and in former times when we think about prompting or like writing text, or even for our show right now, right? Like we would give quite a bit of instructions. It almost like comes out to an A4 paper, like the many instructions we give to to ChatGPT. But indeed, like, the other day I was like trying to understand the real estate market to see where to invest another property. And basically I was just like, okay, what are the best or key markets in Europe to invest for property and I don't know, provide growth opportunities in the future. That was basically the prompt. And it was very interesting because, of course, the O1 model was able to get all the data from the internet. And essentially I got a list of like top 10 European markets with the CAGR or the growth rate of it and also the size of it. So I thought that was very interesting. And it was just basically the simple sentence rather than a whole story that I had to write to like really make sure that I get the information that I wanted. I think another example where maybe there are differences is in summarization. Normally I get quite annoyed by ChatGPT because I get a summary, but I don't think it's really getting to the implications or sort of like the real insights. And also often it misses data, which I think is very important. Like, I don't know, what's the market size, or etc. And actually, I do believe that O1 is a little bit better when it comes to that. So I find it more concise. And I think that's really coming down to that reasoning capability. Any other further thoughts on that, on the modeling, or maybe also on the pace of innovation we see?
To that, what I can add is that one reason that we're seeing this specialization is that it seems that we're hitting these boundaries. We had in a previous show the discussion of just the costs that we're saying this taking now even potentially billions just to get a new model out. And long term, of course, companies cannot continue just investing these massive amounts of money just to have a model that is in all type of tasks better. And what can be like a better approach is just say, hey, let's have models that in a specific subset of tasks will be really good. Only on coding, only on here, this type of more logical, maybe like algebraic related questions and so on, maybe some arithmetic and so on. So, and then we have like this family of models, and then the user chooses what it is. So there is that. And the other thing that I was thinking about this is on just this idea of what it means to reason, in that what Max was saying with this idea of chain of thought, that this was historically a prompt we'll put into the model, we'll write, think out loud or think step by step, and then the model will try to do these possibilities. And now this is baking into the model. So now we don't need to do that. And then it happens what you were describing now, Chris, that instead of having to provide a long question, a lot of context, this now has become much more precise. You just say, give me the properties in the best markets in Europe to invest, and that's it. So this will also bring not only the challenge of choosing the best model, but also we need to rethink how we prompt. So as a society, as an industry and so on, we're just finding out best practices, understanding how to do it. And now with this type of models, we have to now rethink our way of doing things and maybe rewrite what we have done in the past.
Yeah, just to add to that, I was just thinking from like having a conversation with a normal human being, right? So the previous models, it feels like if you were to speak to someone, you ask them a question, they answer you a question, and then you ask them more questions, they answer you with more details. Whereas it feels like with O1, you're having a conversation with them, and they are able to contextually pull the relevant information, kind of just expand the conversation that you're having. That's like you're speaking to someone that's, I think it's more like human as compared to every time you have to ask a question and then go deeper, ask further questions. At least that's how I think about it, from the conversation point, and the amount of content we're getting from the model.
Yeah, definitely. And thinking about the rate of development, I think this is quite crazy, right? I mean, we just talked about humans are supposed to change their behaviors again. I think there's this like new role emerging, prompt engineering or prompt engineer, or someone who actually can talk to the interface of a large language model. And now it's getting simplified, and people now have to adapt again. And I think I've read somewhere that give it another 5 years or so, and I think large language models will get an intelligence of about 140, which I believe is something that Einstein had. So that's kind of crazy to think about. And I also think that the rate of innovation that we've seen in the last couple of months and the releases of new models and incremental models has been quite incredible. And it's interesting to see where this is obviously leading. And I think just as the second topic I wanted to bring up is, what if now you have this like reasoning capability and you apply it to robotics? And I think earlier this year, we already had this news of Figure.ai, which is this general purpose robot. It actually looks like a humanoid, and it can actually do tasks such as recognizing what it sees in front of him. So there's a lot of like cameras going on, and obviously image interpretation, but also reasoning what you see. And for example, there's an apple, and then there's a cup, and a human asks, okay, I want to eat something to reason, okay, I will give the apple to the human being, which is quite incredible if you think about it. And I think what we have learned recently is also this particular startup, Figure.ai, has a partnership with BMW to also test out that human robot in the factory building and to assemble different things. And if you watch the video, it still looks a little bit clunky, to be honest, and a bit slow. But I think we're getting there. And I think if we have this type of fast rate of innovation, probably sooner than later. And I think the recent news here in this whole realm on AI and robotics is really what Google has published recently, which is basically a robot that is able to do dexterity or perform dexterity, which is essentially meaning there are two arms that are working in concert to do things that maybe to us humans seem a little bit trivial, such as tying your shoes or hanging a clothes in a rack. But actually for robots, it's quite difficult. And again, I think I want to get both of your thoughts on what you guys think about it. And maybe I start with Max.
First off, the first thing I think of Terminator. Here we come. It's yeah, hasta la
Definitely.
vista. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's I must say it's quite impressive. And I think to your point, Chris, absolutely. I think asking it, can you pass me something to eat? Being able to first analyze what's in front of you, understanding what you're asking for, what is eat, for example, and then they have to then process what is edible, and being able to pick that up, the right thing, and pass it on to a human that is to your point, a lot of chain of thoughts in order to get to that point, to get you to the item. And to me, I think the ability to do that will basically change because eat is quite a wide thing and they can still pick up the right thing. I think the nuance will come when you start having different types of food in front of you, and to varying degrees of healthiness, to varying degrees of I don't know maturity if they're fruits, for example, and that will start to provide, I guess, the ability to unfortunately replace some humans, especially in like factories. And you can think of it like this way, right? So I would like to pass me a smaller screwdriver to, I don't know, some numbers in order to fix this part of the car. And that basically provide constrained yet wider context, right? Nobody speak as specifically to a robot, say, give me this screw, this amount at this pace. Because of the reasoning engine, it will allow you to, I guess, speak to it more like a normal human being, which I find it really interesting. Hence why I made the comment Terminator, you kind of have to coexist eventually. So it's super exciting.
I would say there is quite some here to wrap in that. The first thought I had was, so now with Max saying about Terminator, in general, robots are a good example of how humans were so bad at predicting the future. So where you think about science fiction, how we thought about the future, how we thought about intelligence and automation and so on, there's always been anthropomorphic, smart robots that somehow are undistinguishable from humans. And it's happening all the way since like the beginning of the 20th century. And in fact, what has happened has been that we're in almost 2025 and we don't have yet robots that are in the wild. And instead, the innovation has come on other type of subset of tasks, in this case, creative tasks, where we always thought the factory work will be replaced. Now we're seeing maybe it's more like the marketing manager who might be replaced. So in the end, it's very hard to predict. And the other thing with robots and in general, so robotics is, this is a subset of technologies that it's always a little bit of like 5 years away. So where self-driving cars is also another type of smart robots. And it's all the time in this perennial limbo of 5 years away. I was also thinking about specifically these human-like robots where maybe you remember, but just I think like a couple of years back, Tesla had also like a big show where they presented some anthropomorphic robot and turned out that it was a human in a suit or so, like for demonstration. It was not like real. And then I was looking at, and I remember that so Toyota had a robot, also human-like for the factories, presented in 2019. So I don't know what happened with these two initiatives. In the end, the idea of this Tesla robot was also to be like a factory worker and so on. But this goes to show how going from prototype, having something that looks very cool in demos, looks very cool in videos, and then really having this rollout that is massive and is on every factory are two different games altogether. And the best case of that is, for example, Boston Dynamics. Famous company, every year they present amazing videos, always they wow everyone. But in the end, have they been really practical use cases? Have they really rolled out this widely? not really.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Rod, that maybe the technology in itself is still a couple of years out. But I think really the innovation or the breakthrough here is the fact that the robot is not necessarily programmed to perform a task. I remember way back in Japan, they used to have this like robot that actually played violin, and you could argue, oh, this is already like dexterity. But I think it took years and years of research and programming to actually get the robot to use and perform as a single piece on a violin. And I think the difference of the news that Google DeepMind actually published is the fact that it's all based on simulations, right? So the robots are not trained particularly to do a certain task, but actually they get to see some videos of, okay, put the screwdriver on the screw, all these different simulations in order to learn how to do the task. And I think this is also with this other robot, Figure.ai, where it's reinforced learning how to correct its mistake, whether or not it's to put a capsule into a coffee machine and not hitting the hole and then readjusting it in order for the capsule to fall into the coffee machine. And I think this is really opening up a new field of use cases as well as flexibility of the robots and their respective tasks. So I think, of course, I agree with you. There's a bit of that show effect, and especially with Figure.ai, and maybe for the audience, we can link it into the video. But I think it does look a little bit creepy, right? It really looks like a robot from a Star Wars or something that actually will, start to like shoot around you or something. But yeah, I think, I don't know. This is at least my opinion.
Absolutely. I would say that the challenge is on the manufacturing, where this type of robots alone, how many bones do we need, and also like little muscles to just move our hands. For a robot to have this at scale, this is very precise, very challenging, very complicated. And maybe this is the bottleneck why we get to see very cool demos, but then when we look out in the streets, we do not see it. But what I do think where the innovation will come from is right with drones. Maybe you have seen, there was this video just a few weeks ago, like in China for a festival of lights where they had a swarm of drones on the sky. And I think it was like 8,000 drones or something, like a massive amount. And they could coordinate themselves and then reshape themselves. And it was at night, so you could see figures in the sky being shaped. And it was little drones just moving around. And this is where I do think that a lot will happen, because on one side, for this you need manufacturing at scale. We already have the supply chains and so on for drones. They're also very cheap to manufacture. Second, we already have a consumer market for that in terms of just camera, flying drone, and so on. And there they have very few moving parts. They are very simple devices. So you just need to pack the intelligence inside and you can do so many things with it.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just to add to that, it's quite interesting. I guess the drones have, it's almost like the drones have an ability to do like one thing. But then when you have a lot of them, you kind of make them into doing a little bit of mix of different activities. Whereas, if you think about, Figure, it's more of like one robot, but allows you to do a lot of things with the two hands that you have. That's really interesting. It's almost like instead of packing all the different, intelligence into one giant robot, you could pack it into 8,000 drones instead. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. To a certain extent, you already see some of those, packing robots in warehouses, for example, right? Like the Ocado and Amazons, they have tons of robots on the ground and just moving stuff for you. Then the question becomes, can they do more by packing more intelligence into them?
So Max, I think this is a really good use case actually for dexterity. Just imagine you have all these packers, or maybe even, during peak hours or peak times like Christmas, for example, right? Like you actually, or Amazon actually contracts many more people in order to like meet the demand of all the orders. And if you were to use robots, obviously you can like pack faster, and you would actually need dexterity to like really do the folding, etc., and to the picking and all these different complex tasks for a robot. And I think this also just makes me appreciate human beings much more, to understand like these tasks to us they don't cost a lot of our brain energy where we, I don't know, tie our shoes or whatnot. But it's actually infinitely hard for a robot. And I think everyone talks about replacing people, etc. Maybe not so soon as we may think. And then on your part, Rod, first of all, happy Mid-Autumn Festival to everyone who's celebrating. I think that's also very, very nice. And yes, indeed, those drone robots that are, showing a couple of like images, like 3D images in the sky has been quite a bit around already in China, Singapore, Asia. Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's sort of like points to like a swarm intelligence that people are developing here. And to be honest, I haven't seen such technology in Europe yet, or at least like in those festivities. But yeah, maybe we'll see that. But I think this is also a really good bridge to our next topic, which is the recent funding, or at least published funding now. Fei-Fei Li's new startup called World Labs. I think we've reported about that already in a couple of episodes, but now it's official, and they have raised 230 million US dollars. And, of course, like very prominent VCs have led the round, like Andreessen Horowitz, NEA, Radical Ventures, and a few others. And they don't really disclose the valuation, but we can assume it's north of 1 billion. And what they do is basically looking into the space of spatial intelligence, and it has to do with the physical world. But I don't know, Rod, did you take a look at it? Can you help us understand what that exactly is?
Yes, they're still keeping things on the wraps, so they're still being quite ambiguous and not disclosing too much. And I see a couple of reasons for that. One is that Fei-Fei Li, so-called godmother of AI, so she has been a Stanford professor for many years, and this type of technology is still potentially in the fundamental stage. So where I can see how similar, for example, with the genesis of something like OpenAI. It was founded, it took quite some time, many years, until there was a commercial product. And the goal is here the progress that she already had in 2D, in images, how can this be brought into a three-dimensional space? So what they call this spatial intelligence. What I can imagine that it can come down to is on all the idea of simulation. Maybe like a buzzword in industry, the idea of digital twins. That let's say we have a machine, and then we have like the digital version of this machine somewhere, and we can simulate things. At the moment, these digital twin simulations, they are very basic. They're not like a three-dimensional object that is in the computer, and then you can explore that. And then it's, let's say, bound to the laws of physics and all type of conditions that are in the real world. It's just like a model with some parameters and so on, and it's simulating the behavior of the machine. So I can imagine that this can become something like a Roblox, like a Minecraft, where people can build or reproduce objects that we have in real life, and then expose them to different set of conditions in a digital environment before this happens in the real world.
Interesting. So you're saying there's a connection now between the 2D or the digital world and the physical world. And I think indeed they are trying to build these 3D models and essentially apply reasoning towards the 3D space and eventually also into the physical space. Max, your thoughts?
Yeah. So I was just thinking from a human's perspective, from a brain and mind perspective. So when we think about spatial distance in relation to something, so I could think of it as, like a little modeling of the world, or little modeling of, I would call it different spectrum or different axis. It's almost like if you have 3D, you basically have three reasoning points. You're just trying to understand where are you in relation to that free little plane. And if I were to take that, just from a reasoning perspective, there's a lot of value to be able to think like that. To begin with, right? So you're not always thinking in just two different manipulative arguments. You can think in, the third argument, for example. I can visualize it on my head like a 3D graph, for example, to give you a sense of understanding where is this thing staying. So that's on the reasoning side. And then when we think about spatial intelligence, a lot of, I guess, at least for me, when I first heard it, I just immediately go straight into physical world. But that's not necessarily the case. Being able to think in those 3D, 4D way is super interesting, right? If anyone watch Big Bang Theory, Sheldon plays a 4D chess, for example. No idea how it is played, but you could think of in that sense, right? Like chess is still a very physical thing, but you also have to think in relation to that plane, to the next plane. how are things related to each other. So it's more of a different way of visualizing reasoning, at least in my head. So instead of drawing 2D of argument points, you can draw 3D of argument points. So it becomes very, very interesting, because I think as humans, one thing we fail to realize, or I fail to realize occasionally, is that a lot of intelligence that our forefathers have done is embedded into us. Therefore, there are a lot of things that we do without actually thinking. But there, for robots, something that's entirely new without those embedded intelligence, this needs to be retrained from ground up. Having those understanding, being able to break down how we think and try to incorporate that is quite exciting. And I think she's also, quite keen on getting US to invest, or should I say academia in the US to invest more into training models for different academic institutions. I think that will help to, I guess, expedite the thinking around this, so more people can play 4D chess in that sense.
Sure, Max. Sure. This is the goal of everyone, But let me ask, spatial intelligence, is this something that, Google's also building right now with Dexterity? Like, don't these robots all need an understanding of space, Rod?
Yes, they need this idea of three-dimensionality and also physics and so on. But I don't think rather so, and she was describing it in an interview with Bloomberg. For example, she was saying about applications for like architects, construction, and so on. And we have to think in like blueprints and all this modeling that happens when, let's say, like we build a high-rise. We'll do a three-dimensional object of this high-rise. Three-dimensional object is stale. We just design and saw how it looks, and that's it. But what if we could set up this one three-dimensional model in a virtual world, representative of our world, and we could expose it to unforeseen events? So now with climate change, we're experiencing all type of things that we have never seen before. All of a sudden, what happens if there is a massive sort of storm that happens? Will this high-rise withstand that? What happens if we have wind streams that are of hundreds of kilometers per hour or something that is very, very, let's say, unexpected and also very strong and is exposed to this building? So I would say that this type of simulation of this spatial intelligence is rather something that is about embedding our models and our, let's say, digital world with the notion of three-dimensionality without having access to it. Whereas in a robot, the robot has sensors and the robot can perceive, okay, this is like a Rubik cube. I can like shape it and so on. This is how it feels. Whereas a CAD design of a building will not have access to those sensors. And nevertheless, we need to like simulate what is if something happens to the building.
Just to add to that really briefly, I think it reminds me of something. So when I was in high school, I took a little class, which is to draw 3D. I don't remember what it's called. This is in Malaysia. So you have to draw 3D diagrams of drawings, but then with very accurate measurements of them. So you basically have like a 2D paper. You try to draw 3D on it. It feels like with robots, because of the pictures and the sensors, what they're doing is just taking pieces of all these different 2D, or should I say 3D drawings on a 2D plane, and then piece it together. Whereas with spatial intelligence, is exactly like what Rod said, which is you immediately kind of just simulate a 3D view on your head. It's like how our mind works, right? We can think of a 3D house, we can almost imagine it, but how do you put that into paper is when you draw it into a 2D paper. So for me, it feels like that. I don't think I'm doing a justice by explaining it, but it does feel like that on a 2D plane, you have to draw a 3D stuff on a 2D paper. It's different from when you have a 3D image on your head.
I think exactly right. And to summarize it, it's basically a software, or I imagine it as a software for architects, for engineers that are building something for the physical world and use simulations, as you say, Rod, to simulate it, how this thing will look like in 3D. And I would assume that obviously spatial intelligence and also what they're working on is far more intelligent, probably even able to design entire cities from scratch within seconds. what I think about here is definitely also the NEOM project in the Middle East, where you have the line and it's an entire city built in the desert. And I can imagine it took many people, many architectural bureaus to like design every bits and detail of it. And I would imagine that, this startup could potentially design this within a couple of seconds, within a couple of prompts, to make that actually visualized, and also in a way that's, taking all these constraints on statics, supply chains, and other factors that are important for a city into account. I think another very interesting point that Fei-Fei Li mentioned was, I thought when I read the article, was that actually universities are not getting enough funding, or the public sector, and that none of the US universities are able to build a large language model because it's so expensive. I mean, it's like, what, $100 million US is what I think OpenAI quoted before to like train their latest models. And I think what I also found interesting, first of all, for everyone, who is this godmother of AI? I think she was a Chinese born that immigrated into the US. And then I think she was working on AI, and she built this database for AI intelligence models to train on images, basically. And that's how she became really famous. And now it's very interesting for me to hear that she's also going into the private sector in order to get more funding. Guys, do you have any, what did you think when you stumbled across that information?
For me, this will be nothing new because it has been read for a while, where this cutting edge artificial intelligence research has gotten so expensive that it's impossible to get the type of funding. In our previous episode, we're just discussing on where does even a company can get the sums required, that we're talking in the billions range, in order to execute this. And we're saying it's only very few companies in very few markets that have access to that type of capital. So imagine if you are a university where so the goal is not commercial, there is not expected return on investment and so on, and the costs are out of proportion. So really, for a subset and increasingly larger subset of problems, these problems cannot be done anymore in academia. They have to be done in the industry. You have to have investors on board and pour in enormous amounts of money.
This reminds me of, I guess, the UK pooling funding for the supercomputer up in Edinburgh, which is kind of to the point, exactly to that point. I think in general, because we're such a capitalistic society, in order for it to be developed via public, we kind of have to look past that. And if you were to do it within academia, it needs to be someone who are extremely interested in it, but also have access to resources, someone who are willing to donate, to even give it to the university to do it. The lack of funding to me is sad, but I think it will have implications long term. And we all know money is just a human construct, right? It's just really to try to get us to a better life of humanity. So why can't we just come together and try to work something out? I think government has a lot of ability to do that, right? I'm not just saying particular government, every single government should probably look into this and I guess provide the necessary funding. Or sometimes I wouldn't even say funding, maybe the resources, right? The data centers to be able to do those trading. Because if we look beyond that, it's just pricing after all.
Totally, Max. And honestly speaking, we're even talking about private universities in the US that are already really expensive. So they do have a lot of funding, actually. But yeah, it seems to be really costly. And I think, I know I'm sidetracking here a little bit, but honestly speaking, I think it's quite interesting to think about the second order consequence here, which is that a lot of private companies are building research hubs, right? I mean, just Google DeepMind, for example, is one of them, and they're attracting so many more people that are willing to go into research because, hey, they get more fun, they get more money to like salary, but then also they're working on really cutting edge stuff that actually does have maybe like a practical implication for the world. And I think that's quite also an interesting development that we see here. But anyways, to wrap it up, I think some other news bits and pieces that we collected for this episode is definitely, again, our darling Klarna that has also been, in the news again for ditching Salesforce and Workday because now they have some internal AI software. And then I think the second one that I thought was very interesting, which goes a little bit beyond what we normally talk about here in the show, is the SpaceX private walk and the billionaire, an intern, and some more engineers going out for a little walk out in space, which I think is quite cool. It really, pushes the boundaries of commercial space flights. But I don't know. What are your reactions to that?
So about Klarna, I would say we're having a lot of discussion in our back channel on the implications of that. And it remains to be seen. So that if one takes like the bullish case, this means that companies, they will be now taking inspiration from that and trying to do their own tools, their own software. And potentially, we're also talking about Salesforce. We're saying how they are trying to now rebrand themselves, or maybe not rebrand, but position themselves as Agent Force, because now they're working with AI agents for their CRM. So this will, on one side, on the SaaS industry, put quite some pressure where large buyers of SaaS software start replacing that software with internal developments, thanks to the speed that AI tools bring in generating code and so on. But also what we'll be seeing is so many indie developers, development studios and so on, that can provide small tools that are almost to the same level as a large enterprise software at a fraction of the cost. So this might be something of like a democratization of software, where if you think about SMEs, who does the applications for your medium-sized business? Most of the time it's like the nephew of the managing director who knows some coding, and then they say, hey, we need now some CRM or some ordering tool and so on, and then over the summer the person codes it, and it's like clunky, not that good. Imagine if now you will have this nephew plus these AI tools, how better it could get. So I do think that the positive side of this Klarna development is we'll be seeing a lot of companies that will become much more faster, much more innovative, thanks to access to these tools.
And what about the spacewalk, Rod? What do you think about it?
It's great to inject fantasy. So we're talking about, so here, the resources required for artificial intelligence and the private industry. This is likely a fraction of what is required for us to have a colony in Mars or in the moon. And for that, we need to have things that inspire us, that motivate us, that so bring fantasy to our society to say, hey, this is the end goal. And this is no longer science fiction, but we are just a few years away. Because if we think about until recently, just landing on the moon again and so on, it felt so far away, it felt really out of like movies and books. But now we're thinking, hey, potentially 10 years from now, we could see a human walking around Mars and so on. I do not know if we are that close, but at least as a society, I do think that this triggers a positive mindset, and also to maybe make us think on where are we allocating our resources, and maybe not only innovation and finances should go into the digital space, into here the case of AI, but rather maybe into this real world of, so where can we colonize, where can we go next as a society and as a species?
Max, what about you? Would you pay north of 55 million US dollars for a spacewalk? Would you do that?
If I have 55 billion, sure.
Million, yeah. It's
Yeah,
that cheap,
exactly.
yeah?
And look, if I have 55 billion, I'll pay 55 million and do it. It's all relative after all. Um, but to answer, I think to kind of just expand on Rod's view, I think it's almost like the Bannister 4 minute mile thing, right? So there's a gentleman who ran the first 4 minute mile. Nobody has done it before, and then after that, just everybody start breaking the 4 minute mile. So this to me feels like this. It feels like we've set a new bar for ourselves as human beings, and then now every young person can try to build something to go for private spacewalks. 55 million today is only available for rich people. I'm pretty sure somewhere someone is trying to build something cheaper for people to go to Mars or go to space. So that is really, really positive, number one. Number two, I must also say with SpaceX, looking at where they have come so far, people can say Elon Musk left, right, and center, crazy and all, but man, that man achieved quite a lot for humanity, like it or not. For all the things that he have done, for all his scenes or whatever you want, I think he is trying to inspire the next generation of, I guess, entrepreneur. So that's two things that I would think is pretty cool. And then as for Klarna, I think to Rod's point, we will see a lot more, I guess, smaller applications being churned out. So number one, I think experiments are going to be quicker. So more softwares, more people building stuff, which is great. Number two, I also think that, for larger softwares, there's a lot of maintenance costs. So my question then becomes, with AI built software, how much maintenance do you need? Or do we not need much maintenance? The reason for that is because we talk about the intelligence. Intelligence is about evolution, the chain of thoughts. Eventually, from this set of actions, we're going to take, Y set of output today. But because we keep using it over time, can it eventually adapt the software to, in X amount of time to Z amount of actions after that? So that's like something I'm thinking about. Instead of just creating more, there's also the ability to adapt the software itself.
Max, I think this is going to just be done by AI itself, no? Or by Figure.ai, a robot that programs something. I don't know. But I think maintenance is probably not the biggest problem here. But I really loved how we're ending here with inspiration. I think that's the key word. And I really loved our today's show because I think before we actually hit the recording button, we were talking about the Renaissance. I mean, I'm currently in Florence where, the birthplace of Renaissance. And we're thinking about, okay, or just imagine like in the Renaissance, what they were thinking when they think of the future. And I think today's show was really about the latest innovation, very inspiring to hear, which is obviously the new model of reasoning O1 by OpenAI. We spoke about dexterity, robotics, and spatial intelligence, and how this is obviously going to help to open up new use cases. We talk about the implications that we see already with the application of AI in general in the enterprise space with Klarna, and how this is obviously changing the landscape. But then also we speak about very geeky and cool stuff like a spacewalk. And I think this is a really great wrap up. Thank you guys so much for your thoughts. Thank you to the audience for listening. And if you liked our show, please subscribe, like, and give some comments. We really appreciate your thoughts and are obviously always looking forward to improving our show. So with that, thank you guys. Thank you, Rod. Thank you, Max, and speak to you soon.